Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you today. Really grateful that we can get together on a subject that I think is very, very important. My name, as you can see, is Ben Woodward, and it's a critical time of year, I think, for us to be discussing this subject, how to turn adversity into opportunity. My background has been in business. I've worked commercially all the way up through the ranks to president of a global organization. I've been working for myself as an entrepreneur now for the last 4 years, and have recently published a book called The Empowerment Paradox, which was recently recognized by Entrepreneur Magazine as one of the top self-empowerment books for 2020. I think this is critical for us to recognize because it makes our subject just so relevant, so important. It highlights that, doesn't it? So I want to begin by asking a couple of critical questions. And that is this. What is, for you, first of all, the number one thing that keeps you up at night? What is it? We all have something, don't we? I want us to be really candid here and really make this presentation, this discussion over the next few minutes that we have together, something that is deeply personal for you. My objective here is to help each of us identify the priority point of pain that we're facing right now. What is it that's causing us the most challenge, the most difficulty, the most restlessness? Identify what that is, and then be able to move comfortably, confidently forwards to a point of progress. That's the goal for today. So critically, this question becomes very important. I'd like you to write the answer down. The answer to this question, what is the number one thing that keeps you up? It could be a commercial concern. You might be experiencing a commercial crisis, some particular challenges in work that are new, unexpected. Of course, 2020 has brought that in abundance for many people. There may have been other things looming before that happened in the first place. So it may be commercial. It may also be personal. Maybe there are some relationship challenges. Maybe there are some trauma or some personal tragedies that you've experienced as well that keeps you up at night. Whether it's commercial or personal, I want you to make note of that, write it down. If it's deeply personal, write it in code if you have to. But it's important that we start here by understanding we've got to have this front and center in our mind for the next few minutes. I want to give context to this, just in case there's anyone in the room that's going, I'm feeling fine. Everything's good. Life is great. But we want that to be the case. And please don't misunderstand me. But Gallup did an emotional report back in 2019. They do it annually, where they identified that those that were interviewed, this is startling. This is American statistics for context. 55% of people that were surveyed felt stressed much of the day. Nearly half felt worried, and almost a fifth felt angry. Now, there's some concerns about this. One, those numbers are very high. So when we think of this, we can, maybe it resonates with us. We can identify with those statistics. But at the same time, as executives, as family members, as carers of other people within your communities, we've got to think beyond ourselves as well, haven't we? We've got to think of ourselves, of course. We've got to think family. We've got to think staff. We've got to think customers and residents. How are they feeling? Now, this is a concern. Let me point this out. This was 2018 data that was shared in 2019. Unfortunately, this was an increase from 2017, pointing out that the trend in regards to our stressed out, worried states is on the increase. Startlingly, this actually put us in the United States of America ahead, more stressed, more worried, more anxious. It put us ahead of the nation of Chad, the world's most pain-stricken country. So something's not right here, is it? Now, I want to start off by giving some context, just a little bit, and share some of my own personal pain points that I've learned from that really form the foundation of this discussion today. When I was 22 years old, I was living in New Zealand, and in a moment of enthusiasm and a burst of impulsivity, I booked a one-way ticket to the United Kingdom. This was where my father lived. I hadn't seen my dad since I was 14 years old. So there was a huge degree of excitement and anticipation because those are very formative years, those 8 years where I hadn't seen him. So I flew over there with anticipation, excitement. Words can't express really how I felt in my eagerness and my expectations for what that reunion would be like. I expected it to be wonderful. All of those missed Christmases, those missed birthdays, those missed special moments were all kind of crashing into one big explosive firework of positive emotion as I'd get to be reacquainted with my long lost father. It was an exciting moment. About 2 weeks in, I'd moved in with my dad. I had about 50 pounds in my pocket. I'm on the other side of the world to the rest of my family, everyone that I'd grown up with, that I knew and had those close bonds with. 2 weeks after moving in with my father, I discovered something horrific. He'd committed some serious crimes, and those crimes had yet been punished by court and by law. They were serious. Now, it fell on my shoulders. What do I do with this? Do I do nothing? Do I say nothing? Where do I go with this? I learned in that moment that it's important to do what's right, not what's easy. I had the terrible burden fall on my shoulders of having to initiate a police investigation against my own father. It led to a court case. I had to testify against him in court. I even drove him to the courthouse myself when he got sentenced. And I watched him walk through those doors to begin his jail term, which was for a very long time. That was a painful, painful journey. I told this story once, not that long ago, and on a podcast. And one of the people in the podcast said, "What kind of douche sends his own dad to prison?" Well, this wasn't a matter of being a douche, ladies and gentlemen. His crimes were bad, and it was tragic for everyone involved. But my goal was not to be punitive or to be spiteful, but it was hurtful and it was painful. That situation, I can't put into words what that did for me, and the journey of discovery about myself and what I had in me to get tough things done really began. That took a long time, and that was very, very instructive. I want to fast forward a couple of years, or a few years into the future from there, and I have another experience. This time, I'm now still in my 20s, this time in my late 20s, and I'm now running 2 international markets for a multi-billion-dollar wellness company. I'm thrilled to be in such a position at such a young age. I'm excited. Life is going well. We've got our business plans working wonders. We're experiencing growth. We're starting to get traction with our strategies. And it's now early January. The plan is put in place. As you know, these plans, annual plans are put together well in advance in the months prior to the start of the year. And I'm at a global comms conference in Germany when I get a phone call from my external affairs manager. And it's desperate and it's pleading. And she says to me, "Ben, get out of that meeting. You've got to come back to the office right now." And I'm like, "What's the matter?" She said, "We've got the Department of Trade and Industry at our door." This is in the UK, where I was running the business there. The Department of Trade and Industry is a consumer protection body. And she said, they've got plans to take us to court and shut us down. They don't like some of the aspects of our business model. They've got some complaints and concerns that have come in. We've got to get this sorted right now. They've got the right to investigate and ask for any piece of data on our business. Whatever they want, we're obliged to give them. And she said, "Oh, and by the way, they don't have to tell us why they're doing this." They gave us no reason why they're taking us to court. They gave us no indicator of what their concerns were. We had to cipher that out ourselves through the process of what questions they were asking, what information were they looking for. Immediately, that fast, our plans for that year ground to a halt. all of a sudden that business plan stopped. It ground to a halt faster than anything. And critically, in that period of time, we had forensic accountants. I'd heard of forensic scientists before, maybe you had too, but forensic accountants took up residence in my office. They found a place to sit and they stayed there for 12 months as they prepared to take us to court. We had enemies inside our camp, ladies and gents. It was not a fun time. During that time, we had to figure out, what are we doing here that we need to grapple with? What are their concerns? What are their problems? I'm pleased to say that in spite of their record of 93% success rate in taking people to court or taking companies to court and shutting them down, we won the court case. At that time, in those 12 months, we ferociously defended what we knew to be right and good. And we stood up for the things that they misunderstood so that we could put it right. And we ate humble pie. We acknowledged the things that we needed to change. We made a dreadful mistake of accepting some industry norms that were just not acceptable. But because the industry was doing it, we accepted it as the wart on our back that this is just part of our business. That crisis taught us something and it instructed us. But I share this because what that did for us was something significant. It turned that moment of crisis into a moment of opportunity. And it's certainly been the case ever since that I've recognized that in business and in life, we are always going into or coming out of a state of crisis. It may be a government investigation. Like I said, I'm thrilled that we won it. We set an industry standard. We made some transformative moves that have influenced the industry ever since. And at the same time, we recognized that this isn't something that's going to go away. Things like this can happen again. We've seen it in 2020, haven't we, with the pandemic? So we've got this cycle that we're going through. We begin with normality. Things are predictable, expectable, we're in control. Then something unexpected happens, we feel out of control. All of a sudden, we're in a different space. Now we have to transform, we have to respond, we have to adapt, and vulnerabilities are given the chance to become strengths. Now, when I use this word crisis, I want to give context here. Crisis we often associate maybe in a commercial context, especially if we're getting together here as execs. But at the same time, this can apply to trauma, to unexpected tragedy. We feel in control of life. Things are going good. All of a sudden, something tragic happens and our lives are turned upside down. We realize we're not really in control of as much as we think, don't we? Now, I've added a fourth point here in this cycle, which is cultural acceptance, where the physical transformation becomes a norm and the collective psyche starts to embrace it with confidence. Now, anyone that's involved in the transformation process would know that cultural acceptance is a part of the transformation, that we don't let go of that journey until that's a part of it. But too many people are quick to let go. And so I've separated that out and segmented that to give it the needed emphasis that it deserves. So have you noticed something though with this cycle? That we go through this cycle of in and out of crisis, in and out of difficult things, challenges coming our way. However, some people, when it happens, they just don't respond well. They get unnerved, they feel uneasy. We see the data already, like we've talked about. More than half of the people that we're surrounded by are stressed. Too many people are worried and anxious. But there are others that when crisis comes or tragedy strikes, they come into their own. They become a new creature and their best selves emerges and something significant happens. I want us to get to a place where each of us can find triumph in adversity, strength in the suffering, and purpose in the things that knock us off our seats so that we can move forward with conviction and confidence. So again, with our concerns in mind, I want us to look at some critical virtues. I'm not going to go through all 7 today. Time won't permit us to do that. And as you look at these virtues at first glance here and now, I would expect that each of us would probably have different interpretations of what each of these virtues mean and represent. Now, there is a hierarchy when it comes to the acquisition of virtues. Sometimes one will trump the other, and they're certainly interconnected. We can't stand alone in a position of strength with a single virtue. The reality is each of us are made up of strengths and weaknesses. So the goal here is to identify, where am I lacking? If there are any of these virtues that I need to work on, which one is most important? It's the one that I struggle with the most. So I want to start again as we jump into this section by sharing another story. I was in Birmingham, England, at a workshop with business owners and entrepreneurs. And we were talking about building their strategies that in order to overcome some of the obstacles, if you've got a strong enough why, a strong enough purpose or reason for being, then you will find your how. That will reveal itself through this process of being anchored to a strong why. So I was having the group participate and share, what are some of your whys for being in business? What's driving you? What's your big motivator? This one lady at the front of the room puts her hand up. She's very enthusiastic. She's at the front of the class. She puts her hand up and she says, she works in the wellness industry as well. She said, my products are all around helping people improve their health, their vitality. She said, this is so important to me because I've just recently overcome a terminal illness. And she said, and because of that, my sense of value and appreciation for life is just through the roof. She said, because of that, I want everyone to appreciate as much as possible the value of good health. And she shared with so much enthusiasm and so much heartbreak her challenge with her terminal illness and her victory over it. It was wonderful. I shared, and as she shared, the lady behind her put her hand up, but she wasn't smiling. She had a bit of a scowl on her face. I could see she had a concern. And I said, I pointed to her, go ahead. She said, I've got a concern with that statement, that story. She said, I've never had a terminal illness. She said, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I want one. But too often we're told in order to really succeed, we've got to have these compelling whys, right? This big reason for being, and it's often born out of great suffering. She said, I haven't had the great suffering, the great stretch that some people have had. She said, I feel like a big tree with little roots. So what do I do about that? I went around the room and I asked the question, how many of you feel the same as her? How many of you feel like a big tree with little roots? Anxious for great things to happen, the big tree, but the little roots there, you're struggling to feel it. About 80% put their hands up. Well, I said, where do we go from this? The answer is in the metaphor that you shared. If you are the tree, the top of the tree is your vision. It's very easy to catch a vision for what we're all about, isn't it? But the root system is like your desires. And our desires don't grow overnight, in a moment, in intensity, in suffering, in the withdrawal of something that we really love. It can grow fast. But for many people, it doesn't grow in a moment. It grows over time. So what we find is a critical starting point for developing our vision or strengthening our vision. The critical starting point for strengthening our vision is that we need to strengthen our desires. What do I mean by our desires? Our desires are really centered on what we love, and what we are focused on repeatedly over time will eventually determine who we become. I'll say that again. What our desires determine what we become. The more we focus on something, the more we pay attention to it over time, that will reveal itself as something true and real for us in our lives. That works for good or for ill. If we desire the wrong things, if we don't desire the right thing enough, it plays out in our actions very quickly. And part of this process is we have to want the consequences of what we want. Now, this is an interesting challenge here to train and practice developing our desires to make sure that we want the right things and that we want them in the right quantity. It's been said that nothing begins until we will it so. Unfortunately, for many people, they aren't willing to change until the pain of the problem becomes greater than the pain of the solution. And that becomes a stumbling block. We don't need to wait for that to be the case for us. Now, in leadership roles, we find this tug of war play out in a different way as well. We've got the natural challenge of wanting the consequences of what we want, building and training our desires to be strong enough to match the weight of our vision so that we can respond appropriately. But at the same time, in leadership roles, something else is at play. We've got two skill sets that we often have to operate: the operational skills and the people skills. Now, neural scans have shown, neural imaging have shown that the networks in our brain that work on the operational skill set and the social skill set don't work at the same time. They work in a seesaw approach. There's almost like a tug of war that goes on. As I engage, my operational skills, my social skills, my relational skills start to go like that. When I engage the other way, it goes like this. And neural signaling has shown this to be true. What's interesting is leaders, executives, CEOs that have learned to get the balance and to manage that tug of war well, rate to be great leaders 72% of the time. So it's critical that we learn to master so many of these things that are at play where they tug at us. Training our desires, training our minds, improving our hearts is something that takes effort, and it doesn't just come naturally. Now, that being said, we want to start with will. Like I said, nothing truly begins until we will it so. However, sometimes that isn't quite enough. This is the challenge, isn't it? That with the interplay of these virtues, they can't stand alone and be successful. Because this doesn't just apply to skills, it doesn't just apply commercially. What happens when we're sunk in the midst of something that is beyond our capacity to fully understand? Viktor Frankl, who's a world-famous Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, gave this example in the context of dimensional ontology. He said, if you were to take a sphere, a cone, a globe, and shine a light down from above them, you would notice that it would cast the same shadow. It would all be circular, wouldn't it? He said, it's not until you get to a higher level, a higher plane, that you can understand what the true shape is in the first instance. Now, this applies to suffering and it applies to crisis. Often the painful symptomatology that we experience is the same, be it a personal challenge, a trauma, a tragedy, a crisis at work, stress, worry, anger, regardless of the trigger, regardless of what it is that's eating us, it provides the same symptomatology, and that can be confusing. So in order to get through it and understand, of necessity, we need to step back from the initial painful symptomatology that we're experiencing and level up our learning. It's only when we can raise our heads above the parameter of our pain and look down from a different perspective that we can start to see where opportunities for change arise. So number one here in this process is, of necessity, we need to relentlessly ask questions, engage our curiosity, engage our creativity in order to level up our learning. We've also got to recognize, and I think 2020 has taught us this, that the world is more uncertain than we expect or than we realize, which means the knowledge that we have to humbly acknowledge is provisional and incomplete. We can't rest on our laurels. We've got to be willing to level up no matter what. Keep that process going. Now, again, will we ever know what's around the corner? No, we don't. That cycle continues to exist. And for some of us, that exists in quick succession or it goes out on a slower pace. But continue, nonetheless, it does. The challenge for many of us is the duration of time, isn't it? Um, the challenge that we face isn't just getting through the crisis, but getting through it well. I remember when my wife was giving birth to our first child. And for those of you that are the women in the room that have given birth and had babies, my hat is off to you. I applaud you. You are all on a pedestal for me. My wife, when she was given birth to our first child, I felt useless and helpless and just totally redundant in the delivery room. I gave her my hand to squeeze in desperate attempt for her to just do something. Hold my hand, squeeze it, make it count. I just bear into the pain. And I gave her my hand, and unfortunately, I gave her this hand with my wedding ring on. And foolishly, in my ignorance, I said to her, you're squeezing pretty hard there, and you're pressing the ring into my fingers. Can you just stop a second so I can take my ring off? That really hurts. That is not the thing to say to a woman in labor. So a quick lesson for anyone that has not yet had children. Do not say that to your spouse or partner. She gave me a fierce look. I've never said that since. I wanted to be helpful, and I kept on saying, bear into the pain. You can do it. One more contraction. You can do it. You can do it. Well, she got through it, and I thought that I was really making a difference. 2 weeks later, she said to me, Ben, you know when you were telling me just one more contraction, you can do it, you'll get through it? And I said, yeah, I was expecting to get a very proud pat on the back here. She said, you were really doing my head in. I said, why did you tell me? Why didn't you say something? She said, well, I wanted you to just feel good. I wanted you to feel a part of this. Critically, she wanted me to be involved. That was great. But I didn't know what I was doing. Now, she's pregnant again, this time on our 8th child. I know what I'm doing. Not just simply from the process of education, but because I've been able to take a step into the dark. What is important here is the next step. The next step in this process is recognizing that there are times in our lives where we don't know what is around the corner. As much as I can get educated, as much as I can level up, that there is going to be a point in time where I just don't simply know enough. But I still need to act. But in order to do that, we need to understand some critical elements of what faith is when I talk about having nourished faith. Because here in that situation, you might be going, what's that got to do with helping your wife give birth? Because that started a journey. At that moment when she gave birth, they passed the child to me, my little boy, Ethan, and she had to go off into theater to get stitched up. As I held him in my arms, I didn't sit down because he was asleep. The nurses came in and they said, oh, Ben, there's a seat over there. Why don't you sit down? Kind of rest up. It's early hours of the morning. And I feigned that I was fine. I said, oh, no, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. I'm happy standing. I wasn't happy standing. I desperately wanted to sit down. I just didn't want to wake him up, because if he woke up, what the heck do? I didn't know. Kim wasn't there. She was in theater. I was in a state of panic. All of a sudden I realized I'm a dad and I don't know what I'm doing. But the love for my children, the care for my children has bred a ferocity of questions and a commitment to their future that no matter what, we're in this together, we're going to make it work. I don't know what's around the corner, but as I go into pregnancy number 8, labor number 8 in a few months' time, I've got greater confidence because of the previous steps that we've made. But I know this, that whilst faith can conquer doubt, it doesn't eliminate them, which means we shouldn't be unsettled with ourselves if I'm experiencing something difficult right now and I'm finding it hard to get through, that I shouldn't beat myself up because I'm finding it tough. In spite of my education, in spite of my commitment, in spite of my vision for the future, we can still experience that sense of doubt and worry, and it doesn't have to shake our faith. We need to recognize that we still take those steps, not in spite of the fear, but because of it. We need to do it anyway. We've got to expect and appreciate that a part of our journey forward is going to involve that struggle of this reality that in spite of all we know, there is still going to be elements that we don't know. And that's okay. That's okay. Now, moving on to that, from there, I think fundamentally, we need to understand the role that patience plays in our lives and in this crisis journey. I love this quote from Shakespeare. How poor are they that have not patience? What wound did ever heal but by degrees? As we're going through our own particular trauma, tragedy, trial, adversity, crisis, whatever it might be. And again, let's come back to this for just a moment. This pain point of yours right now. I want to ask you this question. How long has it been going on? How long do you anticipate it going on? How will you feel 6 months from now? And how will you feel 12 months from now? What impact does time have on your engagement with this challenge? There's been some research developed that has proven something that is critical in this journey. And the research shows that when we rely exclusively on willpower, willpower alone focuses us on our proximate problems, on our immediate vicinity. And we can go so far in that process with willpower. However, when we engage our imaginations and when we move from a state of gritting and bearing it with willpower alone and moving forward with our imagination, or in commercial terms, engaging our vision, then all of a sudden our capacity to endure and endure well increases. And critically, it helps us to make better choices. And importantly, it helps us to go above and beyond our capacity to rely on willpower alone. We can go further in enduring with patience the trials and the challenges that we experience when we engage our imagination. So critically, how do we do that? Because one thing that I find really frustrating is when people tell me, if I'm in a moment of suffering, just hey, hang in there, you'll get through it, bear with it. What do I do if I can't hang in there, if I don't feel like I'm being patient? How do we develop the patience? One, we engage our imagination. How do we do that? We need to look to a future state where better outcomes reside. I'll say that again. We've got to look to the future state where better outcomes reside. We've got to create that clear vision and then work backwards to the present moment. If we're relying purely on willpower alone, then what that typically does is it throws us into the here and now, and that does not help us in developing our strategies for the future. So from there, I think one thing that really requires an awful lot of patience is this principle of forgiveness. Now, you might be wondering, in a commercial setting, what role does forgiveness have to play? I'm a CEO, I'm a senior executive. But what does forgiveness have to do? Well, right now, I don't know what the problems are that you're facing. But regardless, I promise you it relates. I want to tell a story here, and it's a sobering one. It's a heartbreaking one. It's a story back in 2007, a young boy, 18-year-old boy by the name of Abdullah Hussein Zadar in Iran had been playing football out in the streets with his friends, and he was tragically stabbed and killed. His killer was arrested. It was a childhood acquaintance and sentenced to death. His mother, Samira, was devastated, heartbroken, rightfully so, and beyond just, she was beyond heartbroken. Double tragedy for her because she had lost her other son to a motorbike accident just a few years earlier. Now, in Iranian law, when someone is sentenced to death for murder, the father of the victim is allowed to carry out the penalty, meaning if they're being hung, he has the right to kick the chair out from underneath the person being hung. The father of the victim, of Abdullah, saw the grief of his wife and abdicated that right to her. And he gave her this this choice that it's up to you. If you want to do this, you can do it. He counseled her to show compassion on the killer, but she would not do it. She was angry at what had happened. A couple of months before the death penalty was to be taken out, she said she had a vision, a dream, where her son came to her, and her son in that dream told her to show mercy and to forgive the killer. She couldn't do it. She remained angry, and she was restless and furious at what was lying ahead of her. She felt like all of her life had just been destroyed. Her son appeared a couple of times in dreams leading up to that execution. The night before he was to be executed, her son came to her in a dream again. And this time he said nothing. They were in the same room. He looked at her and simply said nothing. She woke up the next morning, still committed to kicking the chair out. Well, the time came, and she walked up to the man. He's on his chair, and she leaned forward and impulsively, instinctively slapped him across the face. And she said, in that moment, as he was bound, blindfolded, and standing in that moment as she slapped him, she said she felt a huge burden lift off her shoulders. And she immediately extended the hand of compassion and stopped the execution. He still went to prison, of course, but she stopped the execution and the death penalty from happening. Why does this happen? Why do I share this? What's the relevance here of this story? It's relevant for a huge amount of reasons. First of all, there are biological benefits that have been shown that when we can learn to forgive others, and I'm going to put forgiveness now into context. Forgiveness here applies to others that have hurt us, that have offended us, that have upset us. It applies to forgiving ourselves. Maybe we've dropped the ball, we've made mistakes, we hold on to it, and that starts to define us and our identity and the choices that we make. It also means letting go of circumstances, situations. Maybe we need to forgive 2020. I don't know. Let go. We've got to learn to let go and set ourselves free. Because when we do that, we don't just liberate the person that held us captive there, we liberate ourselves. She felt free when she forgave. There's biological benefits. Like I said, it reduces stress, it lowers negative emotions, there's fewer cardiovascular problems, our immune system improves. It's interesting that, isn't it? Here we are, we've got a pandemic in the world that attacks the immune system, and yet we've got an opportunity to improve it through something randomly connected here, like forgiveness. Interesting point here, the prefix "for" in the word forgiveness means a way, the opposite, or complete. Meaning, if we are to truly forgive, let go, move forwards, we need to do it completely. We can't do it half-heartedly. This is something that takes practice, it takes effort, and it takes work. And like I say here, forgiveness is an attitude, not just an action. How do all these things come together? How does it work so that all of these virtues provide us a framework where we can have a position of strength moving forwards? We see an interplay, a relationship here where adversity starts to get given shape and given context. When we experience suffering, crisis, or tragedy, if we can't find meaning in the pain, then it remains painful for us. But when we start to give it value, when we understand its context, its opportunity and ability to transform us, then it can empower us. But in order to do that, we need to be committed, first of all, to that end goal. We've got to be able to see in our mind's eye our future self being something different to who we are. That means being the victor of the challenge that we're in front of, that we're facing. We've got to see it first in order to confront it well. At the same time, what is so important is recognizing the necessity of time in the process. There's a great proverb, in patience possess ye your souls. At the same time, in impatience, we lose them. As we build new strategies, as we prepare and as we plan, as we engage our imaginations, and as we gather people around us together to move forwards, we recognize that there is strength in numbers. And so, as I conclude, I want to share one last slide to bring this to a conclusion here. Like I said, I'm not getting through all of the virtues today, but I hope this brings it together nicely. What do you see looking at that slide for just a second? A forest of trees? What we see here is one of the world's largest living organism. It's 106 acres, 6,000 tons. There's over 40,000 stems in that forest, each one lasting about 130 years, but it's one single living organism. How is that so? It's a colony that has a shared root system. The root system has been alive for over 80,000 years. Its interconnectedness, its ability to stay together, is what has made it the largest living, strongest thing on the planet, bigger than anything else that's living. Why is this relevant to us? It's relevant because we have strength when we work together as a community. So often when we struggle, when we suffer, we tend to do it in isolation. We self-isolate, we step back. But if we can learn to exercise these virtues and work together as a collective, we can get greater strength. Our minds work like the pando tree. We have many systems within our body that work as closed loop systems. Our skeletal system, our circulatory system, our endocrine system, they all work together as a closed loop, self-regulating system, meaning you don't need my influence in your life to improve or maintain the quality of your bones. It's a self-regulating system. Yeah, likewise with your circulatory system. However, our emotional system is an open loop system, which means it needs the interaction of others to maintain regularity. We need the interaction. We need the connectedness. We need the community in order to have harmony and balance. My invitation to you today is to think again over these virtues and simply ask this question. As I look at the things that are causing me struggle right now, the things that are my pain points, which of these virtues could I get in greater abundance to help me through? And then set a goal to do something about it. We can move forwards with confidence when we're willing to take responsibility for our own feelings in this journey through whatever toughness, ever challenge we're confronted by. Second challenge is, when I look at my teams, when I look at my family, when I look at those around me, what challenges are they going through that I may or may not be aware of? What emotions are they feeling and experiencing that I could help support them in? I think it's really important to understand that everyone is going through a journey of development in some way, shape, or form. In this process, it's critical to understand that we're in it together. We've got to be like the pando tree and connect. Doing that gives us great strength. Thank you very much for letting me be with you today. I hope you've enjoyed these little lessons on these virtues that bring us to a greater place of strength and positivity in bringing out the other side, a better future for who we are and what we can become. So